Hello, hello, hello my lovely people, and welcome back to Addie's World. My name is Aodain. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. If not and this is your first time, sit down, relax, grab a drink, stay to the end of the video. If you like what you see, maybe think about hitting the subscribe button and making sure your bell is on for all upcoming notifications. Okay people, we are back with our True Crime Thursday, and what I'm going to put here is viewer's discretion. This case was pretty big over here and still does create a lot of controversy. It happened in 1993, but it does deal with the death of a 2-year-old by the hands of 2 young children as well. So I will be going into details about his death and the state and what happened to his body, so the viewer's discretion is here. If it's not for you, I completely understand. It's a tough one. So on the 12th of February 1993, a woman by the name of Denise Bulger, who lived in Merseyside in Liverpool in England, had a friend call over and they decided to go to the local shopping centre, the New Strand shopping centre. Denise had a 2-year-old child at the time, a 2-year-old boy. It was cold, it was miserable out, so she bundled him up, wrapped him up really well, and they decided they would go. Once they got there, they did a few chores, they did what they had to do. Denise noticed that the little toddler was getting a little bit restless, and she was like, oh, you know, I have to get him home before he loses his shit altogether. So the last stop for Denise is she went into the butcher's, and this was around 3:30, 20 to 4 roughly. Denise had a firm hold of her child's hand, but when she went to pay the butcher, she let go of his hand. By the time she turned around, her son had wandered outside and had disappeared. He was nowhere to be found. That little boy's name was James Bulger. And this is his story. Okay guys, as mentioned, James Patrick Bulger was born on the 16th of March 1990 to parents Ralph and Denise in Merseyside in Liverpool. He was said to be an active little 2-year-old, like all 2-year-old boys, and I know from my nephew, he was gorgeous, he was mischievous, and he never walked anywhere, he ran. So he was full of energy, and Denise said he lit up the room, whatever room he was in. He just had this really cheeky smile and just a really cheeky attitude, but in the best way possible. So once we go into a bit more detail on that day. So in the butcher's, Denise, as I said, as mentioned, that she let go of his hand. By the time she had paid and gone outside, James was nowhere to be found. She looked around, started to panic a little, but kind of let the people, I presume there's like mall security, she let them know, and they started this search for James. Now there was a fear that this shopping centre, behind the shopping centre, was a canal, and there was always a fear that James had wandered out there by himself and maybe got into some difficulty. They do say the first hour a child is missing, the child will either come back or be found. Once it got to the 40-minute mark and there was still no signs of James, the actual police were called, and Denise said, once I heard the police were called, you knew it was serious. So after a few hours searching for James, there was no sign of him, and it was closing time in the actual Strand shopping centre. But what they actually did is asked a lot of the shopkeepers and a lot of people who own shops there to come back after hours and to open up their shops, thinking that James was a 2-year-old. He could have got lost, he could have got tired, he could have crawled in somewhere, hid, fell asleep, or just be scared. In the meantime, there was another form of police task with viewing the CCTV within the shopping centre. Now, this is 1993, guys. CCTV is not as up to date as it is now. It was on a paused loop, which, from what I gathered and doing my research, it's like they showed a 10-second clip, then a 10-second clip. It wasn't a continuous, it was more shot by shot by shot. They could pinpoint and they could find James on the camera coming out of the butcher's shop. And what transpired from there scared everyone. The minute James walked outside the shop, he was approached by 2 youths. Now they call them youths, thinking maybe they were in their teens. He was approached by 2 teens. One of them held his hand and they walked him quickly out through the shopping centre out the side. They could actually pinpoint a time. So from the time Denise had let go of Jamie's hand till he was outside the shopping centre, it was 1 minute 31. So the looking in the shopping centre, the looking in all the different shops, going around to people, he wasn't there. They had worked so quickly that he actually was gone before Denise probably even approached her first person. He was gone out of the shopping centre completely. Now, even though these shots on the CCTV were very, very grainy, very hard to distinguish, and I'll put up photos throughout the video, they could still see there was two young boys. One was taking the lead by kind of leading James out, and the other one was clearly walking ahead, but still in sync and with two boys kind of helping, because it was clear that James hadn't wandered off by himself. He was led deliberately away from his parents. So with still no sign of James that night, it was cold, it was miserable, as saying she had his jacket on. They then decided to hold a press conference, and the press conference is heartbreaking because they've people asking questions to Denise and to Ralph, and Denise is very clearly upset, saying, "Just bring back my baby. If you have my baby, I want him back." And still in the meantime, there was this kind of search going out for these two young people that were on the CCTV. Now, this area at the time, I have watched interviews with the police and the sergeants at that time. They said there was a lot of kind of younger kids, like in their teens, maybe causing a bit of trouble. Now, nothing serious, but you know, ditching school, maybe shoplifting. They were gradually starting to bring in young boys, and they had interviewed about 60 at the time. There was still no leads to where James was, and no sign of him, and there was no body. Unfortunately, on the 14th of February, about 4 kilometers away, which is about 2.5 miles from the actual shopping centre, a group of young kids, again, were playing near the railway track, and they noticed a body of a young child, and they went to the police. A call went out, and even though they hadn't officially identified it, Denise and Ralph were told to expect the worst. Eventually, the CCTV footage was actually released to the public. They were getting a lot of tips, but this one woman actually entered into a police station at Walton, which is the railway track quite close to where the body was found. She mentioned to the police, she said she was with her friends that Friday the 12th of February. She was at her friend's house. Her son came home. He was in a right state. His clothes were messy. He was dishevelled. You know, it's not him, but you probably need to talk to him just to rule him out. She goes, but it can't be him. He's only 10 years of age. 10. Okay. And this is where this case gets 10 times worse. They called upon this young boy, and his name was Robert Thompson. Robert was 10 at the time, and the police asked him to come to the police station, as they were interviewing a load of people and they kind of just wanted to get it out of the way. And Robert then said, "Are you going to speak to Jon Venables?" Jon Venables was his friend, who was also a 10-year-old boy. So they actually picked up both boys, assuming, you know, they're 10. The interviews with the sergeants are they couldn't comprehend. They didn't really believe it could be two 10-year-olds which caused this. But they took them to police station, and again, you had two 10-year-olds. They had to be very gentle with them. They had to kind of start off the interview by, do you know what's right and do you know what's wrong? And proceed from there. What came from these interviews was truly, truly horrifying. The boys, after much interrogation, there's 20 hours of footage, or 20 hours of confession tapes. They both tried to blame each other. They both tried to get out of it and everything like this. But it turns out they were the two boys that had picked up James from the butcher and led him outside. They originally brought him outside because they wanted to go down to the canal with him, which I mentioned was behind the shopping centre. The first thing they wanted to do was push him into the river and leave him go. But fortunately, once Robert picked James up, he fell, he banged his head and he scratched his head. He was upset, he was crying. They said they just wanted to leave him there, but James then when they walked away, James started following them, and then they went back from him. They then proceeded to do a 2.5 mile walk to the village of Walden and to this railway track behind it. Between the canal and to the railway tracks, 38 people saw the 3 boys. They didn't intervene. 2 people intervened, and at that time, boys, both John and Robert had said, "Oh, he was our brother. He was crying. We're taking him home." Or another person, they said, "He's lost. We found him randomly. We're taking him to the police station." So when they arrived at the village of Walton, they then went to the disused kind of railway track. And from there, this is where it's going to get horrible, because we're going to go into details. When James's body was found, he was said to have 42 blows to his body. The coroner could not even kind of pinpoint which was the fatal blow. He had blue paint thrown in his left eye. His trousers, his underwear, his socks and his shoes had been removed. The foreskin on his penis had been pushed back forcibly. The boys had been nicking batteries and blue paint, so the blue paint went in his eyes. There was evidence of the batteries been shoved into his mouth, and there is a claim that there was some batteries shoved into James's anus. Once the boys were questioned about this, they both denied they ever did that, but there was slight evidence that this could have happened. The final thing they did then to James, they found a 10 kg or 22 pound iron bar. They dropped it on James's head. They then had, in the meantime, they had thrown sticks and they had thrown bricks at him. Once he was unconscious, that they thought or presumably dead after the final blow, they then proceeded to leave his body on the train tracks in hope that a train would look like an accident. Now, in the 2 days since his body was left there, unfortunately his body was severed by a train. It's tough. But the coroner and the police were able to determine that he was dead before his body had been run over by the train, and that it certainly wasn't an accident, that he had wandered onto the tracks himself. After interviewing the 2 boys, and eventually after much interviews and denial and crying from the boys, kind of when you look at interviews with the police from the time, they were saying Jon Venables was very calculated, that he would cry when the situation got too tense, when they were asking questions. He would hug his mum, he would hug the actual policeman, saying, I never, it was all Robert. While Robert was a bit more defensive, they said he never really showed any remorse for his crime, and again blamed it all on John. There was uproar in Liverpool in 1993, everywhere over the world. These 2 boys were known as Child A and Child B because of their age. They weren't made public. Their names weren't made public to the press. And it's only in recent years that their pictures have come out, and them pictures are kind of frozen in time. So again, the evidence that the police had collected, never mind, they could kind of swayed the 2 boys that they knew they had been involved, because there was paint on one of the boys' shoes. Another one of the boys' shoes, the imprint was left that he had stomped on James's head as he had left it. There was an imprint from his shoe, and there was paint and stuff like that. So they did have the evidence that the boys were there. So the 2 boys then were charged on the 20th of February for the abduction and murder of James Bulger, and on the 22nd of February they were arraigned. Now, there was uproar at this time. A young child had just gone missing. The fact that he was found in such a bad state. And from here, the 2 boys who weren't known at the time, they were given the names Child A and Child B because they were so young, and they were given such special security because a lot of people were very angry, a lot of adults, and they wanted them to be released. They wanted to know their name. So they were given kind of very security detailed once when they were charged and when they had to go to court. So on the 1st of November 1993, the boys they actually had to sit a trial kind of as an adult trial. They were both in the docks. They could barely see over kind of the thing. You could only see their little heads. They had to sit separate to their parents. So it was very much an adult trial. They both did plead not guilty to the abduction of Jamie, but they did plead guilty to the attempting of abduction of another boy earlier that day. Fortunately, his mother had caught the two boys and called them out. The defense wanted to go with the Dolly in Carpax, I think that's how you pronounce it, which was basically these boys were so young they didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and they shouldn't be held legally responsible for their actions. But from the testimonies that they gave themselves in the interviews, they were 10, they knew right from wrong, they knew that baby James didn't deserve to die and somebody had done something wrong to baby James. In the trial, both boys were described as to be capable of mischievous discretion, which is that the act they carried out with criminal intent, they were mature enough to understand the responsibility of right from wrong. The two boys didn't talk, they weren't put on trial. It was mainly they were convicted on there was over 20 hours of tapes that were played throughout, and obviously the discussion of what happened to James's body and what was done to James's body was discussed as well, but the two boys never spoke during the trial. And this trial lasted 24 days, so on the 24th of November, both boys were found guilty in the abduction and first-degree murder of James Patrick Bulger. The judge was quoted to have said that they had committed a crime of such evil and barbarity, and he said, when kind of talking to the boys, he said to both boys, "Your conduct was both cunning and very wicked." They both were detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. Now, I didn't really actually know what Majesty's pleasure was, but basically it's an infinite time that is decided. There is no kind of sentence per se, there's no end date. And from here, the child A and child B were dropped. The judge had kind of gone against the grain and again came out and said that this case, the public interest overrode the interest of the defendants, and their names were released to the public and the photos. Now, this was so hard at the time because their family, again, they weren't to blame, but there was such a vigilante kind of method. These family were threatened. A lot of them moved away and, got out of town because it wasn't safe for them to be there. Robert Thompson was held at Barton Moss Secure Unit, while Venables was then held at Vardy House at Red Bank. It was an 8-bed kind of safe unit. This was widely criticised because these boys didn't even go to a young offenders. They went to a safe house, a secure unit basically, and here they received their education, life skills, more than they were getting, because the two young boys, they were kind of ditching school a lot, didn't have the best family lives, but once they were put in there, they were given free education and life skills, everything like that, to kind of help rehabilitate them. Another kind of point, and it was said when they said about when James's trousers, underwear, socks were removed, they said there was no sexual motive. Well, neither the boys ever said there was, and a psychiatrist came in and said, to this day, when she was seeing them, to this day there was never any inclination that there was ever a sexual motive to this. She also claimed that both of the boys were suffering PTSD from the murder of James. Imagine what his family were suffering. In 2001 then, after serving just 8 years, both boys were deemed rehabilitated. And from here they were given new lives, new identities, new passports, new documents, and released. The reason they were given this is because of the outrage, and there was in 2001 there was a lot of hoo-ha that they didn't want them released, and they were going to be found, they were going to be basically hung, drawn and quartered. So therefore they felt, for the safety of the boys, they had to give them complete new identities. And the terms they were given at the time is they obviously weren't allowed to go back to Merseyside, they were not to get in contact with any of the Bulger family, they were not to kind of tell anyone their real identities. They had probation officers and they had curfews imposed, but they had just served 8 years and not even in a young offenders, not even in a prison, in a secure unit. And because of the new identities, the reason they got new identities as well, because there was a worldwide media injunction, which meant that no photos can be ever circulated of the boys and what they look like now. no identities can be given, their new identities can't be given, where they live cannot be given. So they were released in 2001 saying they had been completely rehabilitated. Now Robert Thompson, whoever he is now, basically he's gone off the radar. Obviously that's not his name anymore, but he hasn't come to the light of anything. It's said that he's in a long-term relationship with a man and who knows his true identity, but he still lives close enough in the area, like he still lives within the UK, but has never reoffended. However, Jon Venables, and I'm gonna put a picture up here of Jon Venables as well, and to me personally there's something very, very off about Jon Venables. Just the photo, just the photo, so Jon Venables was released in 2001. Around 2003 he started kind of moved out on his own. Again, we don't know his name, we don't know, these are just articles that came up and stuff that was released by the media, but also through the courts as well. So they noticed, because he had to meet with his parole officer, that Jon had an affiliation or kind of liked younger girls. He was 18 by the time he was released, and then in 2003 he would have been 20. He usually had a younger girlfriend which was 17 and younger, so they were just a little bit worried about Jon. In 2008 he was arrested for a drunken brawl, was said to have started, and he was only defending himself. I don't think many charges came from that, but from 2010 on, oh boy, you should have never released Jon. In 2010 they said he was rearrested in an unspecified violation of his terms from the original release in 2001, because he wasn't supposed to go back to Merseyside, but he was spending a lot of time in Merseyside and he was telling people his true identity. In June in 2010 he was also charged with the possession and distribution of child pornography and indecent images of children. What he would do is that he would pose online as a 35-year-old woman named Dawn or Donnie, who would gloat and brag about abusing her daughter, her 8-year-old daughter, and would use that trying to gain more disturbing images, trying to get more images or trying to promote more images. It's twisted. When the police went in to see him like this, he was trying to destroy a hard drive which showed basically the rape and sexual abuse of 2-year-olds all the way up to 8-year-olds. So yeah, he's a twisted motherfucker. Eventually he was released back in 2013 again, but in 2017 again he had been recalled due to the same thing of possession and distribution of child sexual abuse, and yeah, just no, not good, kind of pictures and pedophilia and everything like that. So Jon to this day is still in prison. He said, from the articles I read, they say he doesn't want to come out, that he's happier inside, getting ongoing psychiatric treatment, and he would be afraid he would reoffend if he was let out. So the last they heard is that Jon is still actually in prison, and I think that's probably a good thing. When they say the psychiatrist, when they were in the kind of the children's home, and they said there was no sexual motive behind the removing of James's clothes, and then you see what Jon Venables goes on to like and possess and try to distribute and will do anything to get. There's something more there. I still don't believe that there was not a non-sexual motive to what happened to James. Guys, that is the truly horrific case of James Bulger, and what happened when 2 10-year-olds, children themselves, got a hold of him. It's just a horrible case, and it was such a big case over here because it happened in England in 1983. It was a 2-year-old, and the shock then of 2 10-year-olds. I mean, remember I even said the police at the time were like, they couldn't fathom when they went to interview them. They were they it's not going to be these ones. They were thought by the images on the CCTV, they thought they were youths. They thought they could have been like maybe 12 to 18-year-old, but as young as 10, it never crossed their mind. And to this day, they don't know why. And it was never given an actual proper motive of why they abducted Jamie, why they wanted to abduct Jamie, or why they wanted to torture a child like that. So they were said to have bad, you know, social bad upbringings, but there's bad upbringing, I don't give a fuck, you don't do that to a 2-year-old. One of the comments that it just really freaked me out about Robert Thompson, he said, why would I kill a baby? I have my own baby, meaning he had a younger sibling at home. If I wanted to kill a baby, I'd kill my own one. And it was just one of those things that sticks out, and you're just like, okay. But to this day, it's still a case that creates a load of controversy, that these boys basically got away after 8 years of being in a secure home. Yeah, it's a very controversial case, and still is. And the fact that Jon Venables went on to reoffend the way he did, probably, to me, there was signs there from very early age of what he was going to be like. Okay, my lovely people, that is going to be it for today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. It's a tough case. Probably if you're from Europe or this side of the world, you may have heard of it. What about other people in the US and other countries, Canada and stuff like that? Have you ever heard of this case? It's one of those cases that I remember, God, 94. I won't tell you what age it was, but I was young, but I still remember growing up and hearing the stories of, I don't know why but I've always called him Jamie Bulger. So if you hear me calling him Jamie, I mean James. But it's a case that just is twisted. Hard to kind of wrap up a case like that, because you're just like, what do you say after that? But guys, I really hope you liked today's video. If you've lasted this long, thank you so much for sticking with me. If you have any questions or want any cases discussed, let me know down in the comments. I love ya. Stay cool, stay calm, wear your goddamn mask. I'll see you in the next one. Love ya. Bye.